It's great to have you all with us. I'm Mark Cowling. I work for Gather Movement. We have a small team. Kay and Ian on this call are part of that team, and some of our colleagues are involved with other meetings today around the country. But it's lovely to welcome you to this webinar. The Gather Movement supports church unity movements that seek transformation of their places, socially, culturally, but also spiritually too. And today we're going to be thinking about food security, in particular food deserts, and how we can empower communities. We meet every second Tuesday every month for 60 minutes, and we love to hear best practice on a subject and explore how the church might respond to needs in our communities, especially during post-pandemic and cost of living crisis that we're going through. We love to hear stories from around the country, and we also have a chance to break out into groups just to talk together and to pray together towards the end of the session. So I think we'll get started. It's lovely to be able to welcome Dr. Megan Blake from Sheffield University. Welcome, Megan. I also want to welcome Dr. Diana Smith from Southampton University. And I believe Danny Malone is also with us today on the call. She is from the Trussell Trust, Director of Network Programs and Innovation there. So welcome, Danny. And we also have others with expertise in the area of food security. And I'll no doubt be drawing on some of you to just share thoughts and reflections and experiences after we've heard from Dr. Megan Blake. Before I hand over, I'm just going to, as we typically do, just start with a prayer. And I found a prayer today that's specifically about feeding the hungry. So let's just say a little prayer before we start. Lord Jesus, you fed the hungry. You shared your bread with all. Your people hunger now in our country and around the world. And we recognize that we're called to share your bread. And so we pray that rains may fall upon dry and broken earth and quench people's thirst, so that seeds grow tall and flourish, producing bountiful harvests. And may we learn how to share the blessings you give us and to bring comfort to those in need today. May we show love through our actions so all have enough. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, everybody. So, Megan, can I hand over to you? Perhaps you want to introduce yourself and take us away.
Sure thing. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me with you today. I'm going to try to share my screen. I was explaining earlier that I am not a Zoom user usually, so hopefully this will be visible to you. Can everybody see and can everybody hear me all right? Fantastic. So I work at the University of Sheffield. I have been doing work on food insecurity in the UK for about 13 years, but I have been working on this issue for longer than that. My work is driven by a sense of social justice, a desire to ensure that people can live the best life that they can possibly have. And so I do a lot of work with communities. I'm not a keen academic writer, but I do like to work directly with peoples. And a lot of the work that I do and a lot of my research is really research that's embedded in using multiple different kinds of methods, but embedded in and talking to people who are delivering, experiencing, and acting these sort of spaces of food security and food insecurity. So I'm going to today, what I'm going to do is, what I've been asked to do is talk a little bit about food security, more generally, or food insecurity, and then talk specifically about the asset-based community development approach. That approach underpins the work that I've done around a framework which I call food ladders. I'm not going to talk about food ladders so much today, but instead, but there's a lot of the, I'm going to go back a step and kind of talk about some of that underpinning thinking that is behind the food ladders approach, and particularly behind the sort of tier 2, if you're familiar with food ladders, the tier 2 rungs of that approach. All right, so Sorry, need to figure out how to go down it. There we go. So firstly, my research, both quantitative and qualitatively, shows that food insecurity is not a static state that people experience. It's not a binary. It's not a yes, you are, or no, you're not. Instead, people enter, it's very temporal. People enter and exit different levels of food security, depending upon the kind of resources that they have available to them in the place where they live. Vulnerability is increased or decreased depending on the local and individual resources that people have. So when, and I'll talk about and expand on what these notions of resources are, at different times, certain resources become more available to people, and at other times they become less available. One of the things that is really evident to me is that food security is more than economic. And this is based not just on my own research, but also on the research of a great body of research that's been done, including the framing that United Nations uses around food security. In economically wealthy contexts, because we've gotten so used to looking at national level statistics, we tend to think of food security as just about the ability of people to afford food. But actually, those other dimensions that we are more willing to accept in less economically wealthy contexts exist, but exist differently in more wealthy economic development contexts. And I'll elaborate that in a minute. Food security has mental and physical health implications as well, and it settles into places. It creates opportunities or creates situations whereby the resources that people have become whittled away within the places where they live. In order to address food security more widely, or to ensure, to enhance people's ability to be food secure, we also need to repair that damage. There's the damage that's done to people, but also the damage that's done to communities and to places. Because without this, we can't ever ensure a long-term or longer-term resilience to issues such as pandemics and so forth. So I've done a little bit of analysis of the Food and You 2 data that I want to just kind of present to you. So Food and You 2 is the national survey data that the FSA, Food Standards Agency, sorry, had to always forget the acronyms. The Food Standards Agency, the FSA, collects. They're collecting this data they collected it in waves. During the pandemic, they started the Food and You 2 wave, and there are a lot of questions about food insecurity or food security that have been asked within that survey. It's being conducted about every 6 months now. This data, the most recent data, is from January 2022. I'm going to use some statistics from the October to January, or the fall of 21-22 data, because that's the most complete and was most available when I was doing the analysis. One of the things that's really important in this, and we tend to think of food insecurity, or when we emphasize the most needy or the most vulnerable, we're talking about people who are in very low food security. But as you can see from these columns, there are a whole host of people who are in low food security, which means they may be skipping meals, they may be cutting back on food, they may be struggling with having enough on a regular basis, they may be trading down on their diet availability. Marginal food security are people, that's the sort of orange bars across there. Marginal food security are people who are sort of those who are most likely to be the next to slip down the scale. They're people who are getting enough to eat, but again, there might be nutritional elements that are being sacrificed as a result of their marginal positionality. So this is where we can see people who may be getting enough to eat, but are eating the wrong kinds of calories in order to live a healthy life. Then we have people who are in high food security, and I find it quite shocking that in an economically wealthy context, one of the richest in the world, that only 70% of the population, of the adult population, is fully food secure. And this was before the current cost of living prices And I would be willing to bet money that that rate has gone down even further, that rate of food security. For some people, and certainly those other bands, those that we don't necessarily consider as the most vulnerable, have also expanded. So also from that wave 3 data, just to give you a sense of those who are more likely to experience food security, while every group has some vulnerability, families with children are more likely to be food insecure than families without children. And those with 3 or more children are considerably more likely to be food insecure. And we can probably point to some policy decisions that have been made, which have kind of exacerbated this problem. If we look at BAME households, they are also more vulnerable to food security. People with long-term health conditions are more vulnerable to food insecurity, but people who have poor health, which is mostly a subset of people with long-term health conditions, are the people who are most vulnerable to food security. They are 6 times more likely to be food insecure compared to those with good or very good health. So health elements are really linked to food security. And there is some evidence from the research that suggests that people in poor health also, because of their poor health, that creates food insecurity, but also food insecurity itself, because of dietary implications, create poor health. So it's a recursive relationship. I also wanted to just show this about employment or income status. Those who are not working are much more, or who are unemployed, are much more vulnerable to food insecurity, but people are less likely to be food secure compared to, say, those who are retired, who are much more likely to be food secure, or at least to answer the questions in the survey that indicate that they have the finances available to get the food that they need. But there may be other elements that are preventing their ability to have those diets which allow them to live a healthy life. Older people are very at risk to malnutrition. So it's not just about the income aspects. And of course, also working age people who are in work are also remain vulnerable to food insecurity. I want this lastly, and I'm going to end with the statistics too, because I realize those are a bit boring. But I wanted to think about food bank use and the standard food bank, the basic food bank model. And what we can see from the survey is that families with children from Food and U2, and Food and U2 again is the government statistic, Food and U2 indicates that the groups most likely to use a food bank are those with 3 or more children who are food insecure. So even amongst this most likely group, half of those people who could be accessing a food bank are not doing so. The average is about 30% of those who are food insecure, could be accessing a food bank because they're there for them, are not doing so. There's something going on that's preventing people from accessing this help. And a lot of the research that exists suggests that stigma might be part of this. It may be also that one of the things from talking to people that I find is people don't talk about themselves as being in poverty, and yet the poverty language really circulates around the food bank model, and is linked very intimately to how the food bank model is set up. And so people can always find people who are worse off than them, so it's not for them. And then there's personal shame in having to admit that you're not being able to feed your family, or not being able to support yourself. And I certainly have talked to a lot of people who've made these similar kinds of statements. So there's a lot of qualitative research behind these kind of notions. Some of this variation may also be down to where food banks or food support is available for people, as it's not available in every place where people are, and it's difficult sometimes for people to access it. But we're seeing, because of the rise in the landscape of food bank availability, it is still surprising that it's still important to understand that a lot of people are not accessing a food bank, even though they could do so. I want to just turn now to thinking about conceptualizing food security just a little bit more. I've talked a lot about that it's more than the economic. And there are a lot of resources that people need to be food secure, and it includes economic resources. So financial resources allows us to engage with markets, with economic markets. Now, food comes to us most normatively through the supermarket, through an economic market, but it does not have to. And we think about all the other social ways in which we access food, which is not necessarily a market engagement. So whether that's sharing with friends or sharing with our community, whether it's growing our own, and so forth. We also have social resources that can be mobilized. So reciprocity, gifts between people, the ways in which we might collaborate with each other to be able, in so cooperatives and so forth, to access food, and then certainly during the pandemic, what we saw, that mutual aid. Friendship networks, having access, being ability to tap into those social resources is incredibly important. They also build stronger communities when there is, so what we saw certainly during the pandemic is places where there were strong social networks had groups of people who were able to mobilize very quickly. We also need health resources, and I mean that both in terms of mental and physical ability. So mental health, having the headspace, having the emotional ability to engage with the work that's involved in accessing, cooking, making food for oneself and one's family, but also the physical ability, being able to stand at a cooker, being able to walk to the store and so forth, being able to carry things. We have to have knowledge resources. That's the know-how, knowing how to cook things, but it's also knowing what. And one of the things we find is as people struggle to feed their families, their food knowledges shrink. What becomes food becomes narrower and narrower. And over time, knowing what those other foods are, that disappears from collective knowledge in communities. Because it also disappears from the commercial aspect, because people aren't buying it, because they can't afford to buy it, that just becomes not food anymore to people. So understanding, encouraging and enabling diet diversity is also a really important, it's not just cooking skills, but also how do we diversify what people understand as being food is an important component in being food secure. Time is another really important resource. And I didn't show you the slide, but the analysis I've done also shows that as people become more and more food insecure, they also spend a greater and greater amount of time seeking out food within their landscape. So they shop more days a week, trying to access those deals, the yellow stickers, finding the best ways in which to stretch their budgets as much as possible, but also to enable that every day there is food. It doesn't do you any good to do a once a week shop to discover that all your food is gone on Wednesday, and then somehow you've got to get through to the rest of the week. So people shop, they use this as a strategy, this regular shopping. So time, that is an exhausting set of activities for people, particularly if they live in a place where the food environment, where they source their food, is a food desert, is a place where there isn't the food that they need in order to live that healthy life that they need. It can create more and more time burdens, as well as economic, as well as physical burdens. All these things, all these resources have a geographical specificity. They need to be available and mobilizable in the place where people live. Food deserts are places where this is not possible. There are also structural resources or structural elements that constrain people's ability to mobilize these resources. These are legal, policy, and power relationships. And a positive structural environment is one that does not systematically disadvantage certain groups from utilizing their resources in order to achieve food security. Put another way, this is an environment that is socially just. So do we have policies that enable everyone to engage, to have equal amounts of agency in engaging with the environment that exists for them. So socially just food security enables all people in all places to have the food they need to live their very best life, and does so without shame, stigma, or stress. So we can look then at the UN. So this framework is the UN 4 pillars of food security. They tend to represent it. UN represents it as pillars. I like to think of a bit more as a Venn diagram. And each of these different resources intersect with different elements that all must be present in order for people to be food secure. So we tend to just focus on the financial aspects, but actually access is not just can I buy it, but are there legal barriers that prevent me from accessing it? Are there cultural or social barriers that prevent me from accessing that food in that place? There are also elements, you know, and one of the examples that I give here is one time recently I went to, in the student union at my university, I went to go buy a cup of coffee at one of the shops, and I had my, you know, my change that I dug out at the bottom of my bag, and I went to buy this cup of coffee, and I could only use a card to buy the coffee. It was only digital, and you know, that was fine. I had my phone, I could do that. But I kept thinking, what if I was someone who doesn't have access to a bank account? Maybe I have the money, maybe I've got, you know, the £1.50 or whatever it was, but if I've not got access to a bank account, I can't actually buy that item that I wanted to buy. And as we see this move toward digital purchasing, digital everything, digital access, there are certainly certain groups who are going to be disadvantaged in their ability to not just access food, but access the other services and things that they need that will enable them to access food. Availability are really these place-based elements, and it really links to, is it safe, is it healthy, and is it where I live? It's not right that we make those who are struggling the most go the furthest in order to access the food they need, because it adds an extra dimension of burden for them. You have to get a bus, you have to maybe change buses, you have to carry this food home with you, you're struggling. If you have some health issues, that activity is going to be even more difficult. And then finally, utilization. We tend to think of utilization, or historically have thought of utilization in terms of food safety, but actually if we think about utilization in terms of skills and bodily ability, in terms of know-how and know what, and the headspace that people have. Do I have the space in my life? Can I get beyond that immediate crisis that I've gone to actually think and plan? Do I have that? And if we don't have that, people are not going to eat well. They're going to eat what they can get within that space of their constrained life. So how do we expand those spaces for people? And of course, these all overlap. And the fourth pillar, of course, is stability. So can I do this all the time? And we certainly see that there is there are cycles for certain people whereby they can do this at the beginning of the month, but they can't do it at the end of the month, or there may be have health at the beginning of the month, but they don't have health at the end of the month. You'll be pleased to know I'm kind of reaching the end or moving on here now. So I just wanted to, I'm not going to go through all of this, but I wanted to just say, you know, in terms of research evidence, in terms of what works, what can we do to address these issues, to kind of rebuild and enhance? There are very few intervention studies that sort of do control trial experiments to see what works best. What we do know is that the food bank model from research in the United States shows that it does not prevent food insecurity either in the short term, in the long term. People who use food banks remain food insecure, diets suffer, and there's evidence that shows that they're stigmatizing. There is some evidence when you add in additional services to the basic food bank model that actually they can make a difference in those other areas. So through health interventions will improve health outcomes and so forth, but it doesn't necessarily improve the food security on the whole. Some evidence also from these studies shows that choice is important, but we don't really know how much choice is enough, and at what scale does choice matter. So there's a lot of gaps in our understanding. We have a lot of research from provider studies in the United Kingdom and social science research that looks at internally at what happens within different models of support. And we can see that pantries, from that research, pantries and social eating activities increase enjoyment from food, improve well-being, increase healthy eating and access to healthy foods, increase community connections, and have less stigma than the food banks do. And this is from surveys. So I do some work with a provider, and this is there is evidence from surveys that are done with quite large samples, so 6,000 or more people who are actually the users of the service. We see from social science and provider studies that area-based approaches are more socially acceptable than group-specific schemes because it doesn't create those barriers. People experience stigma in the places where they live, and this is from voucher studies. Studies on cookery skills help increase the ability to utilize food and improve self-confidence and enjoyment food. They can help build community cohesion and provide avenues of reciprocity. But with all these three elements, the framing of the intervention makes an enormous difference toward their acceptability and take-up. So if you go into a community saying, you don't know how to cook, we're going to teach you how to cook, that's not going to gain a lot of traction. But if you go in saying, we'd like to explore some new foods, come help us explore these new foods, and you bring in and build the and make it fun, that is more likely to engage people's willingness to do cookery skills, including things like, we want to help you get the most value out of the money that you're spending on your food, as a positive framing around that. There is no evidence that there's one magic bullet. Instead, the research suggests that a range of options that are responsive to a range of local needs and involve communities in their delivery are more acceptable and help repair the social, individual, and dietary causes and effects of food insecurity. And there's a large debate going on around cash first. And I just wanted to kind of present this notion. It's my view that increasing spending power will help address the affordability dimension of food insecurity, but I don't see, or I struggle to see, how cash first will address the other dimensions and resource needs and effects that people of food insecurity that people have. They don't also challenge the structural inequalities that creates financial social disadvantage in the first instance. It just shifts that dependence back onto the state. Whereas my view is that we need to find ways that do that repair and build capability such that dependence is something that is not as prevalent. So the final slide here is, I was asked to talk about asset-based community development. And asset-based community development is an approach to making stronger communities. It's a way of framing not just what we say to people, but how we do the actions, or how we do food support. So it acknowledges need, but doesn't emphasize that need. It's not about the most vulnerable and creating a group that is the most vulnerable. Instead, it's about creating opportunities to enhance, include, or expand on the resources and assets that people have. So a really good example that I know of is one there's an organization in Doncaster called Edlington Community Organization, and ECO do this breakfast club with kids. And the parents are invited to the breakfast club, and there's not the it's not framed around your children are not attending school or your children are not getting breakfast. Instead, it's framed around, let us help each other to make sure the homework's done, to have a warm breakfast for everyone, and to finish up all that stuff that people need to do as they're rushing off to coordinate to go to school. So what happens is people are cooking toast for each other, they're braiding hair, some people are looking and checking over children's homework. That's a whole different kind of way of thinking about a breakfast club that actually is really, it's engaging people, it's incorporating them into the activity, it's not stigmatizing, it's not telling people what they should be doing, but instead is mobilizing those community resources. And what the community has seen is that school attendance and the ability of children to engage with school has increased because of this. One of the things about asset-based community development seeks to do is it reduces stigma by reducing the barriers to participation. And one of the big elements of stigma is those when we create divisions between people, those who have and those who do not have, those who are givers and those who are receivers, those who are vulnerable and worthy, perhaps, or those who are not worthy or not vulnerable. So it seeks to kind of bypass that by not creating divisions between groups. It also seeks to enable the opportunity to participate in decision making, but does not command people. It does not say you must come and help make decisions, but it gives people a chance to participate in different ways that fit within their life. So it could be through a suggestion box, or it could be as much as participating in the governance body, for example, or having opportunities to vote, or having opportunities to feedback. It builds on and emphasizes shared values, and values are certainly really important. So everybody has, and there are certainly very strong values around thrift, around care, around justice, around reciprocity in the British context. Now, importantly, what this asset-based approach seeks to do is create interventions that allows everyone to practice these values. So the example of the breakfast club that I gave you, everybody gets to practice reciprocity because some are making toast, some are cooking breakfast for kids, some are braiding hair. Nobody is left out of the action, as opposed to, say, an approach where you have a group of volunteers who are always the volunteers and a group of recipients who are always the recipients, who are not ever allowed to be reciprocal, who are never allowed to engage with notions of thrift or care back to that community until they no longer are needed or no longer are needy. You know, you move in from one group to another within certain models, and really the asset-based approach does not, it starts from a position of allowing everyone to have an ability to practice. Doesn't mean everybody will, but has an ability to participate and practice. There's also an important component about making safe spaces for people to learn and engage in new ways of working, and being through a shared journey together. And that example is that breakfast club that I gave you, but there are hundreds of examples. There's an organization in Derbyshire that does gardening together. That is one of these. There's a really brilliant example in Newcastle that's a men's pie club. So people are learning how to make pies, but they're doing it in a way where people are equal. And then it creates a positive and social atmosphere. So the emphasis isn't about what's, you know, come tell us how miserable your life is, but instead let's have an event where we eat together and share positive stories about our lives, and learn about each other in ways that can create that social cohesion that's needed in communities. Asset-based approaches have been criticized as being neoliberal in the sense that they are seen sometimes as an either or. You do an asset-based approach or you have legal structural frameworks. And it's certainly my view that an asset-based approach is one that's local, whereas policy and legal frameworks work at a national scale. And in order to address these issues that we're talking about, we need multi-scalar approaches. So it doesn't replace changing the welfare system to make it more equitable. It doesn't change reducing inequalities in the labor market and so forth. All right, so I'll finish there. I hope I haven't gone too much over time. There's a couple of examples that I just want to point to. Please do get in touch with me if you have further questions that you have. There's my Twitter and email. I have a wonderful film about Edlington Eco if you'd like to go see it. And I tend to put a lot of the material very open access available on a blog space that I run called geofoodie.org. So, you know, please do check out resources there. There's more about the food ladders approach on that as well. So I'll stop there.
That's absolutely wonderful, Megan. Thank you so much. You've given us a brilliant framework there to think about food insecurity and perhaps how we help people progress out of very low and low, you know, through this sort of food ladders idea. So thank you so much. I think you've also really given us a great vocabulary there that will help us broaden our language that we can use as we talk about this issue together. So thank you again. We've got some guests with us today that I just want to draw on. But before we do that, if you'd like to ask questions to Megan or any of our other guests who are with us today, then do just put them in the chat and we'll try and answer those if we've got time for them. Let's go to Ian Rutherford first. Ian, I think one of the things that we think about at Gather is this is not a single issue, it's a big issue and multiple issues. And actually, as churches working together, there's a real imperative that we do work together on something that's as big an issue as this. Do you want to just come in and share your reflections on what we've heard today?
Oh, thanks, Mark. So I'm Ian Rutherford. I'm the City Centre Minister here at Methodist Central Hall in Manchester. I'm Andy Burnham's Faith Sector Lead on Homelessness and Housing, but I'm also the Chair of the Food Security Action Network in Greater Manchester. So I just wanted to respond to you, Megan, by saying that the way that you've presented to us, I mean, we all want those slides now because it's been very powerful to see some of the way that you've presented things. But it does seem to me that there are three things that we always have to have in our minds. I mean, the first is the numbers, the second is the narratives, and the third is the networking. In terms of the numbers, I mean, in Greater Manchester, they're even more scary than the ones that you've presented to us nationally. So we've got significant more food insecurity in Greater Manchester than that. But obviously we need to be getting those resident surveys, those member surveys from the organisations to really understand what's happening and to be able to map any advances that we make as sort of cross-sector collaborations going forward. Those narratives are so important, to hear the stories of the reality of things, to have the framing of the intervention that you've mentioned being positive, and also having a strength-based approach. Having that sort of narrative running through the work that we do with food security is so vital. The networking is the bit that I think I would be positing, as you've just said, Mark, that we have to be involved with. We have to see this as being across a range of models, across a range of structures of food provision, involving all of the sectors, whether it be private, food manufacturers, supermarkets, etc., public, voluntary, faith, health, all have to be involved in this sort of mixed situation. The idea that we as churches can sort of resolve this is not tenable. It has to be done in some sort of cross-sector collaboration. I think that's the principles that you've talked about that I've really got a hold of in your presentation. We talk here about dignity, agency, and power as being the key elements, and I think they come across very strongly in your approach. Mm-hmm. And I think also we're very clear that there needs to be good food. It needs to be healthy food. It needs to be good food. The idea that we just simply give what we can get to people is not, again, an appropriate course of action. So I'm very grateful for that. Just to give you a bit of a Greater Manchester story, we've taken an approach, and Elaine, who's the strategic lead for this, is with us from the Combined Authority today, and Beth Myring, who's here, is one of our co-chairs for our task groups. We're working particularly on No Child Goes Hungry as our main theme. So we're working across three areas: healthy start vouchers, holiday hunger, and those who miss out in terms of income maximisation and accessibility. So we're really targeting actions in relation to those things. But I think what we'll take away from this today are the principles that you've given us, which we want to make sure that we have in all of our interventions across the sectors. So that's my response to what you've said there, Megan. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. That's really, really helpful. Dr. Diana Smith, can I bring you in? It's lovely to have you from Southampton University. I mean, I know you've done some research on food deserts and this kind of area. Perhaps you could just share some reflections on what you've heard, but also maybe just mention, because it was very pioneering to be part of that cost of living summit, where actually, you had these different cross-sector organizations workshopping together. Maybe you could just share a little bit about that as a way that we can network together.
Absolutely. So thanks for inviting me today. like Megan, another North American working in food insecurity for 20 years now, and I thought I'd be done with it by now, but here we are, 20 years on, still looking at food deserts, which I find surprising and somewhat distressing. But what I like is the coherence everyone is now bringing together. Rather than just using food banks as the answer, we're thinking much more carefully and thoughtfully about how we can respond to this meaningfully in a way that people want to engage with. And in Southampton, I think that's been going on really effectively. And also, I live in the New Forest, which everyone thinks is quite wealthy, but I can assure you it's not. I spend every Tuesday morning at a mobile food larder supported by FareShare, where people are able to come and collect food. What I really wanted to kind of focus on was the agency that Ian just brought up as well. So one of the things that we really try and strive for is making sure that people have some choice rather than just going to a food bank and picking up a bag of goods that's been chosen for them. There's all these alternative models now around food larders and food pantries where people go shopping. And in Southampton, that's been a big collaboration between local government and Southampton City Mission Marketplace, which is setting up these, what they call food clubs. And the food clubs, as well as people coming and joining and going shopping to buy food at a greatly reduced price. They're also able to engage with citizens' advice to deal with kind of income maximization. So going back to kind of cash first response as an agency, bringing that back in together, because that kind of holistic answer is really important here. It's about giving people dignity, food, community. So actually they're working as community hubs as well. And that's really good to see. So it's not quite in the same vein as what Megan was discussing earlier, but it's moving towards that model. So one of the marketplaces at St. Mary's Church has been running for a year now, and we're doing an evaluation of these spaces in terms of how they're affecting people's mental health and well-being and food security and food quality, crucially. And the early kind of results are quite positive. Part of what we're doing in Southampton, and again in the New Forest as well, is a different type of asset approach. So looking at asset mapping and seeing what kind of assets are currently in place in terms of employment, transportation. In rural areas, transportation is such a barrier to having access to employment, which gets you money, or to good quality food or affordable food. And we did a good old-fashioned food basket comparison. And Mark, you might remember from the presentation that we found a huge disparity in cost for the same basic 20 items of food, not going by branded, but just the cheapest option available. It was £16 at a large Tesco in one part of the New Forest. 7 miles away in a small village, it was £38. Both of these are Tesco's, but it's because there's a small Tesco versus a large Tesco. So, well, I think there is some merit in going back to those kind of traditional methods of looking at inequality around food deserts to just kind of capture those disparities and think, how can we answer this? How can we address this? And one way is through what we're doing now, which is actually funded by the Trussell Trust. There's a person in post to take actions forward, such as increasing transportation to affordable food options, expanding the mobile food larder options in our more rural areas. So I think we need to be really sensitive to place and think about what is the best response in this place, whether it's urban, rural, what type of communities we have in place, and so on. And there's so much more I'll say, but I'll stop there just to kind of, I think that brings it together. But this was all done as a kind of different sort of community research. We brought together local governments, charities, and community members to find out what would make a difference for you, and then built it up from there. The other statistic I wanted to bring in that I came across just recently for Southampton City Council, we were working on food insecurity, was that over 50% of universal credit claimants are classified as food insecure from the latest food and use survey. So that's quite a shocking number, given that welfare system is meant to be supporting people out of food security. But like Megan said, what we all strive for really is to get people out of the situation where they're reliant upon food aid and thinking about these kind of more comprehensive and holistic responses to it. Oh, and if it's useful to anyone, a lot of the work I do is good old-fashioned geography mapping and looking at where there might be gaps in provision of food aid and also higher risk of food insecurity. And there's a website I can share a link to that we use for joint strategic needs assessments and also for kind of provision and food poverty action plans, which I've been doing for quite a bit of a time with my colleague Claire Thompson, who's a qualitative researcher. So I'll share a link in the chat for that as well.
Diana, thank you. That's been absolutely brilliant. We're so grateful to you. And that link would be wonderful. I think, again, something that we're doing as church unity movements within local authority boundaries is that mapping work, because together we can be more coordinated to address some of those gaps, not just on our own, but actually working with our civic authorities as well. So thank you so much. Danny Malone from Trussell Trust, thank you so much for being with us today on this call. We're so grateful to be able to partner with you in so many places around the country to help people with food. Do you want to just introduce yourself, Danny, what your role is, and then maybe just share some reflections on what we've been talking about today with regards to food security?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be with you. My role at Trussell is Director of Network Programs and Innovation. So that's really supporting food banks in our network to think about some of those wider issues that are pushing people to need to use a food bank, so that we can look at some of the solutions that might start to address some of those. So lots of the things that Megan was talking about, some of the things that Dana was talking about, very much at the top of our minds. I think in terms of responding to what we've heard today, I think absolutely agree with so much of what Megan shared, that food banks on their own cannot address or prevent food insecurity. They are a sticking plaster, and we recognise that. We are definitely not here to say food banks are the answer. And we do recognise that for many people, visiting a food bank is an incredibly feeling a sense of stigma or shame in that. And I think one thing I would say is that our food banks do seek to go above and beyond to make people feel safe, to make people feel welcomed, and to afford people as much dignity as we can. But ultimately, it comes back to that no one should need to use the food bank, because actually they are not the right answer. They are not the right thing to address food security in the long term. And that's why we focus on the structural issue. So we really seek to advocate for structural changes in the policy landscape to make sure that the benefit system is acting as a safety net it's meant to be, but also thinking about some of those wraparound support. So thinking about financial inclusion, income maximisation, making sure people are able to maximise their incomes, but also the community, the mental health, the wider support that is going to make such a difference to people who are facing crisis. Totally agree and advocate for a holistic range of responses to addressing food security and that range of options, because often we know that people end up in a crisis situation under a range of different circumstances. 1 in 5 people who visit our food banks are in households that are working. And that's a statistic that we're seeing rising. We're seeing a rising number of people who are in work coming to a food bank. We've seen people who might have considered themselves to be doing okay, but then all of a sudden a family bereavement or a change of circumstance, a caring responsibility has meant that they no longer have that stability that they once had. But we also see lots of people who visit our food banks who have maybe some more complex life circumstances that require a range of different supports. And so we as Trussell and our food bank network would definitely position ourselves in that crisis end of the support, that it's about people who are facing those crises. We're not a long-term solution to seeing people enter a place where they are more food secure. And there was a couple of comments in the chat about cash first responses. And I think we advocate for, we would say, kind of cash and advice approaches. So rather than a food bank being the answer to a person's crisis, we would very much say, like they used to do a long time ago, it would be great if local authorities had welfare schemes that when someone faced a crisis and needed a bit of financial support to see them through, we would love to see those kind of opportunities return, because people who visit our food banks tell us that actually a kind of cash grant often makes a difference between them needing to use a food bank or not. But actually cash on its own is not the answer. We also know that advice and support, community, all those holistic things have to be a part of it. But I think the thing that we often come back to is that the issue really isn't always about food, as Megan really helpfully articulated today, that the issue is people in destitution, people in poverty, and actually a cash grant or cash funding and support for people in times of crisis enables them to choose and prioritize what they need to be able to focus on. For some people, it's about paying their energy bills. For some people, it's about paying for their prescriptions. Some people, it's traveling to work. And that's why we're looking at advocating for kind of local welfare assistance schemes being kind of reinstated across the country. And then in terms of the asset-based development approaches, absolutely agree with that approach and the balance of that kind of local versus national. And we're really, as Trussell, heavily invested in supporting that kind of participatory approach, including community organising, which is all about involving people with lived experience and the community coming together to advocate for itself and to speak truth to power, and really focusing on those local solutions that focus on the whole solution, the whole system, bringing communities together, asset based. I think the biggest thing, and I'll just end on this, that like when I think about food security and where we are now to where we'd like to get to, and those models like the asset-based models that Megan was talking about, and which I think are absolutely the direction we should be heading in. Last year we gave out 2.1 million emergency food parcels, and the scale at which we're seeing people needing to use a food bank, we're expecting probably a 40% increase on the whole, maybe across this year compared to last year. And so the scale at which we're seeing people needing to use a food bank is a thing that often keeps me up at night, where how do we think in that scale to transition towards models that are going to be more long-term and really enable people to live life in all its fullness.
Yeah. Danny, thank you so much. Just so grateful to get your experience with the extensive work you're doing across our country. So thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing. The sense we've had from speaking to civic leaders is that the recovery time from the pandemic and the cost of living crisis will be at least 5 to 10 years. And so I think it's incumbent on us as churches to continue to think and pray about how we respond to this. And we're so blessed that we've got so many great partners to help us think about making the greatest impact in our communities. I'm grateful for Ian's comment, just reminding us that this is not a silo piece of work, but we need to work alongside homelessness, the real living wage, digital inclusion, well-being, social prescribing, and of course the zero carbon target in a holistic strategy. To do this, it's not something that we can do on our own. We need to be part of a united church playing its part in a united community, actually, don't we? We need to be really working as a team together if we're going to try and address these problems in better ways. So Beth Myring, I know you're with us from Salford, and I know you had a question a little earlier, which I think may have been answered, but I just wanted to give you a moment just to reflect on what's been heard as well today, and maybe just share your experiences with food in Salford.
Thanks, Mark. I wasn't expecting that, but it's lovely to be with you all. My name's Beth. I work in Salford on a beautiful grey rainy street at the moment. I run a community centre here, and I also coordinate HAF provision for the City of Salford. So for those that don't know, that's the Holiday Activities Fund, which the Department for Education fund to provide good quality food and fun for young people and children in the holidays. And so I found it really, well, I love listening to people like Megan and Diane as well. It's just wonderful to hear all the research that you're doing about the work that we're doing. And I'm looking forward to all the information that you might find out about HAF as it develops and goes forward, because it's so interesting to, having worked, I've had a various number of jobs, but I've been here at the Life Centre working in this community for about 7 years. And so trying to work alongside local people to see transformation. And we've been delivering kind of holiday clubs with local people for a long time. And we're now employing people to deliver these holiday clubs because the Department for Education want them delivered on such a big scale. And for everyone else, there are holiday clubs happening in every single one of your local authority areas. So if you don't know about it, do connect with it, because it's an untapped resource for some families who are eligible for free school meals. But it is a real challenge to consider how we work from that asset-based approach, how we make sure that the provision is non-stigmatizing. Very difficult when you're given eligibility criteria by the government as well. So it has to be children who are on free school meals. So a lot of the reason why the Life Centre is involved here in Salford is about that framing. It's about how we bring a kind of different, more positive and inclusive approach to working alongside people in that provision. But yeah, really, I mean, I just found it fascinating, Megan, lots of the things that you were talking about in terms of just the amount of time that people locally here spend shopping. You wouldn't believe it. And what with shopping and appointments, I don't know how anyone could ever have a job or keep a job, or, you know, it is unbelievable for some people, particularly those who've got poorer health and those who need to go from place to place to place. And the element of transport, I think, is important as well, because we do have food clubs across our city. So we've really gone for that food pantry model and had a food share network that pushes for that. But they're open in different parts of the city on different days. And so we've got people who are traveling on different days to different parts of the city, or will come and say it's a Thursday, but actually I can't get anywhere because it's Thursday and I can't afford to get to Little Holton, which is the other end of Salford. So my question, if either of you have time to respond to it, was just, I don't know loads about the cash first approach, but I have heard an awful lot within my sector of people saying cash first is the way to go. Obviously, I'm not delivering cash first, I'm delivering half, which is a bit different. But I'd really be interested, Megan, in just to hear a little bit more about what your concerns were about that approach, because I think we're all kind of being put on that bus to go there.
Again, do you want to just come back briefly to Beth on that one?
Yeah, so one of the things with the cash first approach for me is that there's a lot of vagueness in the language that's used and a lot of misunderstanding around the landscape about what food support or food aid is, and everything gets swept up in it, and everybody gets swept up in it. And actually, what I think cash first is really advocating for is for those who have zero, the most vulnerable, we should be giving them cash rather than tins of food. And correct me if I'm wrong, somebody who uses this language regularly. What I struggle with is, firstly, I think that we should be catching people before they get to that point. And in order to catch people, we need services that enable them to stretch their budgets, to build their health, and so forth. Cash doesn't do that. Cash doesn't repair those mental health issues. Once people get into that very bad space, there is a lot more repair work that has to happen. Now, there are economies, speaking economically, there are economies of scale. So if you have £100,000 and you've got 300,000 people, I'm just making numbers up here, you're only giving each household or each person £3, but 300,000 or whatever the maths is, sorry, I probably messed that maths up. But when you bring that money together, you can do something like deliver a half program or provide free school meals, which reach a greater number of people and help them to bridge the gap between emergency support and mainstream economic shopping. And there's a big gap between emergency and that mainstream. So that, I guess I have lots of kind of concerns and criticisms around the half approach. It doesn't necessarily, or the not half, sorry, I like half, again, around the cash first. And one of the things is it's not ensuring that people change their diets, that they get the food that that will actually help them have and the knowledge that they need in order to have that better food experience and to repair those kind of bad relationships that people end up having with food, because food isn't just nutrients and calories, it's also the glue that helps us to have joyous experiences with other people. And that's as much a part of our healthful environment as having nutrients and calories. I'll stop there. I mean, I could go on and on, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, Megan. Well, thank you, everybody, for contributing. Our hour is up, so I need to draw things to a close. But thank you again to Dr. Megan Blake, to Dr. Diana Smith, to Danny Malone, to Ian Rutherford, and to you, Beth, for contributing today. So helpful, having all your expertise given to us today. Huge thanks again. Just a couple of quick notices as we finish. If you've not registered your space, perhaps your church space, as a warm welcome space, then can I encourage you to do that by going to warmwelcome.uk. Not only is it good for those that are needing to find warm spaces and a good welcome at this time, but actually our civic leaders are really looking at this nationally and at a more local level, and it just illustrates how much the church is able to do across an area. So again, just to encourage you to join the nearly 4,000 spaces, churches and libraries that have registered on that system. If you would like to have a one-to-one free consultation provided by Gather Movement, do get in touch with us. We'd love to help you think through a borough-wide strategy for your church unity movement. So yeah, please do get in touch. Our next learning community is on the 14th of February, again, that second Tuesday of the month. And we're going to be thinking about when cross-sector partnerships deliver. And we're going to have Paul Woodman from Love Southampton, who worked with Diana Smith and colleagues down in Southampton to bring together that fantastic cost of living summit. He's going to share with us something about how that collaboration was brought about and how they're moving forward in that collaboration to improve the support offered to the most vulnerable in the community around food and mental health especially. We have a summit coming up this summer, in fact 3 summits. So Kay, over to you for a quick notice about that.
Very quickly, because I know we've run out of time. This summer in June, we're going to have 2 summits, which is our national conference where we can get everybody together and discuss the kind of things that we share on our learning communities each month, but we just have a whole day together, and there'll be a mix of main stage presentations and some workshops and seminars and worship, and just a fabulous time to be together. So save the date, and more information to come. We're going to be in Sheffield on the 8th of June 2023, and we're going to be in London on the 21st of June 2023, and more information will be coming soon.
Thanks, Kay. That's great. Just finally, I think one of the things that's come out of today for me is that actually church-based hubs are a major strategic way forward for the church, and that can provide those wraparound services, including food. And actually, we're going to be looking at this a good deal more. There's something called family hubs going on nationally at the moment, and we'll be sharing more on that in the coming months. So do keep in touch with us for more discussions around hubs for both the families, the elderly, and for the very vulnerable in our community. Folks, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great to have such wonderful expertise and leadership around us. God bless you this week, and we'll look forward to reconnecting soon, we hope. Thank you very much.